we are just past 7 o'clock and I see we've got a quorum of council present. I will call our meeting to order and Karen asked for a roll call, please.
Councilmember Gerard?
Here.
Councilmember Husnick?
Here.
Councilmember Munson?
Here.
Councilmember Byström?
Here.
Mayor Bain?
Here. And ask everybody to rise and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. If you would like to shut off your camera before you do so, you may do that in the bottom right left-hand tray of your Zoom. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Members of council, we have an agenda before you this evening. I would like to propose a minor amendment to the agenda to add in a new item number 5 and for just a quick emergency services update from Chief Newman. And with that recommendation, I will entertain a motion to approve an amended agenda.
A motion to approve the agenda as amended. I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. Karen, could we have a roll call?
Councilmember Gerard?
Aye.
Councilmember Husnick?
Aye.
Councilmember Munson?
Aye.
Councilmember Byström?
Aye.
Mayor Bain?
Aye. Agenda is approved. Next item on the agenda is the new number 5. Chief Newman, could you just give us a quick update on the emergency services message that just recently went out?
I can. On Monday, September 28th at 6:30 p.m., Minnesota and several other states experienced an outage to the 911 network. This outage does include Washington County. Should you need law enforcement, fire, or emergency medical services in Washington County, please call the Washington County Sheriff's Office at 651-439-9381. A code red message will be sent when the network is restored, and you can also get an update on the Forest Lake Fire Department and Police Department Facebook pages and Twitter accounts.
Thank you, Chief. Council members, any questions of Chief?
Any idea on the source of the outage? What caused the outage?
At this time, there's no information that's available. It's a multi-state outage, and so individually, if it's within a single state, they can fix or resolve those issues fairly quickly. When it's a multi-state, that does take time. So this outage could be for a while.
And so a code red message did go out of the outage, and then they will do another code red message when service is restored. Did I understand that right?
That's correct. They will send out another code red when the system is up and running. And then at that time, we will update the Facebook pages and Twitter.
Perfect. And could we also get that shared on the City of Forest Lake website as well? I just think any channel we can.
I will work with Dan to get that done.
Perfect. Thank you. Councilmember Gerard.
Since this is an outage, what happens when they dial 911?
Good question.
It just doesn't connect to the 911 system. It doesn't get routed to that dispatch center. So you'll probably hear a busy signal.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Chief? Thank you for the update. With that, we'll move on to our next agenda item, which is open forum. Karen, were there any open forum submissions this evening? And and I see her shaking her head no. Very good. We will move on to our consent agenda. Council, before you have consent agenda items for your consideration, items A through O, I will entertain a motion to approve or any changes.
Mayor Bain, I'd like to pull item L. It involves my employer. Just don't want a perceived conflict of interest, so I prefer to abstain. Thank you.
Understood.
And with that, whoops.
Go ahead.
With that, I'd make a motion to approve consent agenda items A through L and N and O.
I'll second.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Oh, I'm sorry. You said A through, you're pulling item L. I just want to make sure I have this right.
Sorry,
You're
did
pulling-
I say L? I meant M.
Okay,
Did I say L? I apologize. So I'm pulling item M, and I'd like to approve A through L and N and O.
perfect.
Okay.
My alphabet works. We have a motion and we have a second. Karen, could we have a roll call on the consent agenda?
Councilmember Gerard,
Aye.
Councilmember Husnick,
Aye.
Councilmember Munson, Councilmember Munson,
We might have, I think we lost Councilmember Munson.
I think we did. Councilmember Byström,
Aye.
Mayor Bain.
Aye. Consent agenda items approved, and moving on to consent agenda item M. Entertain a motion. I'll make a motion to approve consent agenda item M.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion on that item? Seeing none, Karen, could we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Gerard,
Aye.
Councilmember Husnick,
Aye.
Councilmember Munson, Councilmember Byström,
Abstain.
and Mayor Bain.
Aye. Item approved. Moving on to our regular agenda this evening, we have item A, which is the Tanners Brook minor subdivision application. I believe, Donovan, are you walking us through this?
Yes. Mayor, members of council, I'd like to present the Tanners Brook Golf Course 10-acre, 20-acre minor subdivision. This is located on the northwest corner of Tanners Brook Golf Course. And you can see on the screen Tanners Brook and the parcel that's being carved off from the main 80-acre golf course parcel is roughly the area here that is currently pasture land. It's currently mowed. And this is one that the council did approve in 2017, but unfortunately the applicant didn't have the deed signed, and so we're doing it again. It's the same application, same parcel lines, and so you can see here on the survey how this dashed line represents that. At that time, in 2017, the city did receive a dedication of a public roadway and utility easements, and even a minor subdivision agreement that was executed. But right now we're coming before you is a 10-acre parcel to be created. It's legal conforming and conforming for this MXR1 zoned property. And basically it's a do-over, a mulligan for your golf fans, and just to get the allow Andrea Brisky and the owners who's here with us on the call, also with the allow her to record the deeds and actively market the parcel for sale. With that, I'm happy to take any questions from council.
Thank you, Donovan. Council members, any questions you may have of the application? Seeing none, I see we've got
Donovan.
Councilmember Munson back with us. She just got disconnected here, so
Okay.
go ahead, Sam.
The only question I have is nothing's really changed with this application from the previous time. I mean, they haven't asked for anything more or changed lot lines or anything like that. Everything is still the same. Is that correct?
It is still the same. It's a formality, but 120 days after council city approval of this type of application, if it's not, the deed isn't recorded, the approval is null and void. So unfortunately, we are doing it again. The same thing.
Any other questions? This one was straightforward. This one seems straightforward for me. I don't have any other questions. Not seeing any questions from council. I will make a motion that we approve the minor subdivision application.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Sam, anything further to add?
No, I was just going to second your motion. That's all.
Okay. We have a
No
motion
problem.
and a second.
Yeah.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, Karen, could we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Gerard,
Aye.
Councilmember Husnick,
Aye.
Councilmember Munson, Councilmember Byström,
Aye.
Mayor Bain.
Aye, and motion approved. Next item on our agenda this evening is B, the Forest Hills Farm dock variance denial appeal hearing. And I believe Pete is going to get us started on conversation. Process tonight will be, we'll hear from Pete, we'll have Donovan present from a staff perspective, and then we will invite the applicant and their representatives to present any information they may want council to consider this evening. So Pete, do you want to get us started?
Thank you, Your Honor, council members. This is an appeal from a decision the Planning Commission made. And so there's a specific application in front of the Planning Commission. There's a record upon which the Planning Commission made their decision. The applicant by our code has a right to appeal that otherwise final decision to the City Council. And now it's before you to decide whether you agree with the Planning Commission and would affirm or want to reverse and grant the variance. Either way, whatever your decision is, you will need to adopt written findings, which we would bring to you memorialized in a resolution at the next opportunity. What that comes down to, though, is when you're thinking about the questions you might have for the appellant or staff, when it's time to vote, you'll need to articulate what the reasons are that you've chosen to make the motion, whichever direction it goes. I would like to also apologize for an error in my memorandum. Mr. Hart correctly identified the outcome below. Planning Commission vote was 4-2, was not unanimous as indicated in my memo. So I'd particularly like to apologize to Chair Langness and Commissioner Kuhn and remind council that contrary to what I said, there was a significant minority view on the Planning Commission on what should happen here. I've suggested that Mr. Hart provide a very brief summary of what happened below. I would encourage council not to ask questions of staff at this point because it's the appellant's appeal. It's up to them to let you know what they want to hear. And I believe staff should be in a responding position, not in a first foot forward position here, to give them every opportunity to make their case to council. With that, I would recommend, Your Honor, that you ask Mr. Hartz to briefly summarize what happened in a non-argumentative fashion so that everyone watching can sort of follow along as the appellant makes their case.
Very good. Thank you for that tee up. And Donovan, do you want to make a couple of opening remarks just to tee up, and then we'll turn it over to the representatives.
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Mayor, members of council. I'd like to present the basic context and for this variance application. It was made on behalf of the Forest Hills Farms HOA, Homeowners Association. This relates to the original approval for Forest Hills Farms. I assume council members know the location of it on the southeast corner of Third Lake. Before you can see is the 18 slip dock design that was approved in 2007. This was the maximum number of slips allowed per the zoning code, per the Shoreland Overlay District rules. This was memorialized in the development agreement that set a length that was executed with the developer in the city. Set a length of 210 feet maximum, 18 slips. Also, there were references to this, the number of slips within the Declaration of Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions that is part of the purchase agreements when homeowners buy the properties and become a part of the HOA. As required by the code, staff did send a notice of the public hearing to the DNR, and they provided review comments, and they recommend denial of this variance. There were 7 public comments, 7 residents sent written comments in. 1 was in support, 5 letters were against, and 1 letter offered conditional support. On September 9th, the Plan Commission made a motion 4-2 to deny this application. And then on September 16th, Mr. Blake Roberts, the applicant, and his attorney, Patrick Doran, appealed that decision. And then on September 23rd, the Plan Commission affirmed the decision in a resolution that listed the 5 reasons that they based their decision on. And these are: the applicant did not identify a specific condition or circumstance unique to the subject parcel that would result in a practical difficulty, as opposed to a mere inconvenience to the owners if the dock was not expanded. Reasonable uses are already permitted by the zoning code without a dock extension. The application failed to demonstrate that the variance would be consistent with the spirit and intent of this chapter and with the comprehensive plan. The Forest Hills Farm First Edition Declaration of Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions document explicitly states the number of slips is limited, and any property owner shall not expect the number of slips to change. By agreeing to be bound by the CCR document at the time of property purchase, the purchaser of a lot without an assigned boat slip chose the circumstance in which a property does not have an assigned boat slip. The proposed boat slip would result in an unreasonably, I'm sorry, I'm reading some of the initial, but so let me reread number 4 here. The Forest Hills Farm First Edition Declaration of Covenants, Conditions, and Restriction document explicitly states that the number of slips is limited and property owners shall not expect the number of slips to change, and the proposed slip would result in a dock that would alter the essential character of the locality by adversely affecting the use, enjoyment, and safety as stated by those individuals speaking of the essential character of their locality. So that was, in a nutshell, what the Planning Commission was presented with and the findings that they adopted to support their decision.
Thank you, Donovan. I believe we've got members of representatives from the Homeowners Association here this evening, and I guess I would invite the applicant to present any information that you would like council for us to consider, and would turn it over to you. Blake, I believe you're probably, are you starting us off here?
Yes, I would. First off, I just want to thank you for considering this appeal. I would like my representative, Patrick Dorn from Miller & Stevens, to just start off, and I will have some additional comments after that.
Thanks,
The floor
Blake.
is yours. Thank you for being here.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the council and staff. I appreciate that welcome and thank you for having us. I'd just like to start off and speaking in generic terms. We're hoping that the council, I know there's specific requirements that were laid out by staff, by the attorney, by your counsel. And so I don't want that to get lost in this conversation. And certainly I'm going to address the findings and the standard and those particular items, as well as maybe some clarifications. You can call them changes, and maybe your counsel can pipe in about what can be considered by the council as we sit here today. We're not amending the request. We're making some clarifications, and certainly we're going to be using the record at the Planning Commission. And so I'll let your counsel advise you on what he feels is appropriate. But I do want to just mention from the outset, the hope is with the Planning Commission has a very specific role, and the council has a very specific role. And the hope here is tonight that the council can, in addition to looking at the standards, obviously I think everybody's aware by what staff has written, the lengthy discussion at the Planning Commission meeting, what your counsel has written, that this is not your average variance request. This isn't to use the example I used at the Planning Commission, this isn't, somebody trying to build a pole barn and there's either wetland or the topography that requires the particular landowner to violate setback in some way. So we understand that this is not your typical variance request. And so I think with all that being said, a bird's eye view from 30,000 feet, in addition to the standards, again, I'm not sitting here saying we should lose sight of the standards, but I think it is important to also look at this from a bird's eye view and just take into all the factors that are here before you. And so with that being said, I think the first thing I can touch on that applies to the essential character of the locality, the reasonable use, in harmony with the comprehensive plan. I think I can touch base on all of those issues with kind of a simple statement that the applicant is requesting a change essentially of 4.5 dock slips. The current dock allows for technically 18.4 or 18.6. I don't know why that number is escaping me right now. I think it's 18.4 slips according to the code, and they're asking for 23, so it's a request of 4.6 slips. And so one thing I touched on in the appeal letter, and one thing I think is important to note, the findings of fact at the Planning Commission level state that the property owner can use the property currently in a reasonable manner. What was noted by your counsel in his memorandum is that it's the proposed use is a reasonable use. I think both factors can be considered by this council, but I do think that it's important to make that distinction that, as your attorney had stated, that one of the factors is that the proposed use is reasonable. And so again, we had a lengthy discussion at the Planning Commission meeting regarding many of the neighboring properties, communities, whatever you want to call them, HOAs, complexes, that have more slips with less lakeshore, that have long docks. And we had that long discussion, and I understand that Mr. Hart would say those are grandfathered in. And certainly I don't disagree with that. Those are there for a reason, and those were done before the shoreland overlay ordinance was put into effect. But the question that I'm answering right now, or speaking on right now, is essential character of the locality. If we have Tim's Marina, if we have docks on the north side of the lake that are very long due to the level of the water, if we have Aqua, who was granted the conditional use permit that increased their slips, I think the request, and I would argue that the request is reasonable. And I understand those are the way that they are for a certain specific reason. Grandfathered in, Aqua was a conditional use permit, so we're talking, I wouldn't say apples to oranges, but I'd say maybe apples to pears. But the question that is before us is the proposed use reasonable? And I would argue that we're talking about 5 slips, thousands of properties on the lake, many boats. Obviously, the council is aware of the population surrounding the lake, the use of the lake. So I think we're talking about, and I understand, DNR is always, I'm city attorney myself. Our office has been city attorney for a very long time. DNR routinely takes these positions when it relates to Lakeshore. I understand their concern, and I think that's a reasonable position for DNR to take. Very rarely do they support something that that might increase traffic on the lake. Although I think that argument's a little disingenuous. I think we're talking about, while they're non-riparian properties, we're talking about properties that are right next to the lake. You know, the expectation is that those people are going to be using the lake, whether they have slips or not. I think they're buying those properties to have easy access to the lake. So while I understand DNR's concern, and I know Mr. Hart, and obviously respect his opinion about the increased usage of the lake, I don't think, it would be my personal opinion, that the use of the lake is going to see any noticeable effect with 5 slips. And so I think that's answering the question. The proposed use is reasonable. I don't think it alters the essential character of the locality, because we do have those other properties with many slips, long docks, you know, Tim's Marina Aqua, the properties on the north side of the lake. And I do want to bring up, I know, and I mentioned in my appellate letter, John and Pam Swanson's dock proposal. They said that they would support the, you know, I think it's the one that Mr. Hart mentioned that as conditional support. I think after further discussion, the HOA would be willing to use that dock suggestion. He was saying if the dock looked something like this, I would be in support of it, because I think we can accomplish some additional safety for surrounding neighbors while still allowing the HOA to get the slips that they want. And I would defer to counsel on this. I do think it would be my legal opinion, and of course I'm not your counsel, so you might want to bounce it off him if you think it's appropriate. I do think, because it was part of the agenda packet for the Planning Commission, I think it was discussed somewhat at length at the Planning Commission, that it is part of the record, and I do think it can be considered by this council, even though we didn't represent at that Planning Commission meeting that was something that the Homeowners Association would be willing to do, but they are representing tonight that is something that they'd be willing to do. And so again, I think if we get, you know, I know the dock issue again was discussed quite a bit at the Planning Commission meeting, and I do want to bring up the fact that the HOA is also willing to agree to conditions. If the city wants to put a condition on this variance that says any dock, proposed dock, needs to be approved by the council, fine. If it's regarding storage, they would be fine with that. So I do think the applicant's not here demanding anything. I think particularly unreasonable. They're willing to work with the city. They're willing to engage, you know, whether it's coming back and getting some sort of dock approval or storage approval or things like that. They would be certainly willing to do that. So I think that touches, you know, the amount of slips that they're asking for, the neighboring properties, and really the lake as a whole. I do think that the proposed use is reasonable. I don't think it alters the character, the essential character of the locality. And I think it's in tune with the comprehensive plan. You know, we're talking about the same things that are visible and are in use in other aspects of the lake. And so I think that particular comment, or those particular comments, you know, it would be, again, my legal opinion. And of course I'm advocating for my client, but I think it's a situation where I, you know, looking at this legally, I think the applicant meets those particular standards that were discussed in the findings of fact at the Planning Commission level. So I would respectfully disagree with those. The next thing I wanted to touch on was the development agreement. Again, we had a very lengthy conversation at the Planning Commission regarding the development agreement. We're splitting hairs here. We're talking about language, and that's what us as attorneys do. Everybody concedes that the development agreement says what it says. It says the expectation that the amount of slips is not going to increase, or you're not purchasing this lot with any sort of promise that the amount of slips is going to be proportional with the amount of homes that are on there. An expectation is an expectation. It's not a prohibition. It's not a restriction. It's just saying you can't expect this to happen. And so while the expectation wasn't, it was clear that the expectation was that they weren't going to increase. I don't think that's a prohibition. And I think here we're asking the council to consider that, okay, you know, we understand this is why we're going through this process. We're going to the city council because at the time it wasn't allowed. And so now the applicant is coming to the city council to say, you know, we know the expectation wasn't to have 23, but that doesn't prohibit us from asking. We think we meet the standard. And while we appreciate the development agreement in the way that it was, and I'll touch on how it's kind of changed here in a second, you know, while we appreciate that was the expectation, we don't think that's a hard and fast rule. Otherwise, it would have said so. It would have said this will never, ever, ever change. You're absolutely 100% prohibited from having any more than 18.4 slips. And so for that reason, I think, again, I would just tend to disagree with that part of the findings of fact from the Planning Commission. And circling back on why I think this is a different variance, I know everybody's had some discussions about the unique circumstances. Again, this isn't we're not looking at a topography issue. We're not looking at wetland that causes a garage to be put in a particular place. You know, nothing in the law prohibits this type of variance request. Although I think your counsel would probably also agree with me that this type of variance request is probably quite rare, which I would appreciate the long conversation at the Planning Commission, and of course, you guys here tonight listening to us and talking it out as best as we can. So what's changed from the expectation at the time that the development was proposed to be, well, really the PUD, while it was proposed to have 56 lots, and at the time you're thinking, okay, 18 slips, you know, that's based on the amount of shoreline. And again, we've talked about how Forest Hills Farms First Edition has way more shoreline than a lot of other neighboring communities, which have more slips proportional to their shoreland. And again, I understand why that is. But a situation where it was a lot different, the numbers changed. It was a situation where, you know, the developer reduced the lots to 23. It was a situation where now we have 18 slips to 23 properties as opposed to 56, where it probably wouldn't be an issue that somebody would be looking at. Okay, I understand that these particular properties have slips, these particular properties don't. We're talking about 35 properties that don't have slips, and they're non-riparian properties. So it would have been understandable that the development just wasn't going to be able to have 56 slips. It's similar, you know, we could look at that change in circumstance, the fact that these property owners that are here before you making this request weren't the ones that agreed to the development agreement. And although I know staff would say, and the facts would say, these property owners had the opportunity to look at the development agreement. Maybe it was a recorded document that came with their title commitment. It was a part of a purchase agreement. Maybe the seller disclosed it. You know, but again, the law says that the problem can't be caused by the property owners. Well, the problem isn't caused by these property owners. The problem was created at a time where these property owners might not even have been thinking about Forest Hills Farms First Edition. It might not even been on their radar. They might not have purchased yet, or it was completely out of their control. And so I think there is a unique circumstance here. I think it's a little bit different than your average unique circumstance. I think we can all agree on that. That's why your agenda packet's going to have a little bit more information here. But it's a situation where I think, again, we're looking at this, and I think I've addressed the standard, but we're looking at this as what kind of effect this is going to have on neighboring properties. Is it in harmony with the comprehensive plan? You know, of course, somebody could take the position, and I'm not going to sit here and argue with Mr. Hart or the DNR representative about what kind of intensification this is going to have on the lake. You know, in the course of over time, the lake has become more popular. It has become more populated. There have been more properties that have been built, including Forest Farms First Edition. You know, the hope is that because the lake and the surrounding areas are largely developed, because the empty space, again, this was a discussion at the Planning Commission level, the property that those other additional 23 lots, you know, there's no expectation that those would ever have slips anyways. Though that issue would have to come back before this council, and this council would have full control over those 23 lots. And I don't, you know, Mr. Roberts can correct me, but I don't think there's any plan whatsoever about even developing that area. But I think the council can feel comfortable And knowing that the lake is largely developed, many of the, most if not all of the lake shore is already accounted for. There's already docks out there. Everybody's kind of aware of the number of slips that are located on each property. And I think because there's not a lot of future development expected, that the council can feel comfortable that I think the intensification, again, it's my personal opinion, and someone might have a different opinion than me, but I think that the intensification of the use of the lake for 5 additional slips for properties that are already really fairly close to the lake, I think is probably a bit disingenuous, to say that there's some sort of extreme or even significant or noticeable intensification of the use of the lake. So again, I think the people that might notice increased traffic, like the neighbors, again, the HOA is willing and able to have conversations with those neighbors. The applicant is willing to come back before this council if the council wishes to place conditions regarding approving a dock, storage of the dock, or any other condition that the council thinks is appropriate for this variance. So I think the applicant is willing to work with those people, just as they're sitting here and representing to you today that John and Pam Swanson had a valid concern. And the applicant is willing to listen to that concern and is saying, look, we'll hear you out. We agree. That's actually not a bad idea. I think it does improve the safety for some of the neighbors around that area. And so we're not going to sit here and fight them. If that's what it takes to get their support because they're one of the closer neighbors, then fine. We're happy to do that. And so with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Roberts if he has anything else to add. And of course, we're happy to answer any questions that the mayor and council may have tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Blake, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. If I can just add on to just a few points that Patrick had made. The fact that the neighbors on either side, one to the north is supportive of this, and the Swansons to the south willing to suggest another alternative. I think that's a key thing for us. The rest of the property owners down 210th, their effect would be much less. We did early on in these conversations have a survey on the property to make sure that we weren't encroaching on either property to the north or the south of us, not only just over their property lines, but also the sight lines. So I think that's something to add that's key. Patrick also mentioned the conditional use permit out at Aqua. That was granted in 2017. There was an additional request at that point after the original marina was put up in, I believe, in 2008 or so, maybe later, where they did ask for additional slips. And not only that, they had asked for some additional overnight dockage morning. That was granted. That currently, as most of you know, there's not a restaurant out there, and that is fully being used as a marina with fully used overnight dockage where they're only supposed to have 10. Point being there is that the city probably isn't aware of that. There's no difference. There's no change in the use. No different than adding additional 5 slips to our dock here. Currently, the EDA, as many of you might know, I'm on the EDA. The EDA has been approached to adding additional slips downtown to increase the usage of the lake. I think that's something that the city is strongly looking on for, and a positive for both downtown and the city as a whole. The other point is the additional properties or additional common properties that are similar to the Forest Hills Farms, where, as Patrick mentioned, the ratio of dock versus slips versus land is not even comparable to what we would have. Even with the additional slips, we'd be way under that ratio. Early on, the initial talks with the city, because this has been going on for quite some time, was to do this as a zoning text amendment and getting everyone in compliance. That was the initial thought on that, and Donovan and city was very supportive of that. But then after talking to DNR, that was a change, and so we just feel that this is getting everyone on an equal playing field and a way to not a huge ask, and really would not change the environment. So I might be having some internet connection issues right now. So I may be cutting in and out. So I'll stop at that and field any questions, or maybe it's better for Patrick too, based on my internet connection.
You are sounding good, so no issues on transmission. Thank you, Patrick and Blake, and council, let's open it up first. Let's first ask any questions that we may have of the applicant, and then bring conversation back to questions we may have either of staff or kind of clarifying questions we might need. So what questions would we have of the applicant at this time? I guess I have a, I want to make sure that I'm considering all points here, and it seems like there's a couple of questions on the table as part of the variance request, and one is around density, which is, formulaic and represented in a very formulaic fashion in our code. And it's simply a matter of doing the math and do you meet the density requirement or not. But then the second element of this is related to design. And I know that there were a lot of questions related to design at the Planning Commission level. I did watch the full Planning Commission discussion of this. And it was represented in some questions that Planning Commission had of you, the applicant, and also came through in some of the concerns from nearby property owners. And what's challenging for me as I look at, do we have complete information? I feel like we're hypothesizing a bit on what design is. And so and I know as part of your, you haven't brought a design to the table as part of the appeal. So I can only presume that that design isn't complete yet. You don't have it yet. Where are we? Where are you in the kind of the design of the dock? And because I do think that that's a critical data point that helps me to shape my opinion on this particular matter. I just want to make sure I'm understanding where you are in that design process.
Yeah, so the point or the reasoning behind the initial application without sort of a hard line, here's the dock that we're requesting, either take it or leave it, was because the applicant was willing to work with the city and maybe make this either a conditional variance based on the city was going to require actual approval of the dock, or to work with, or to see what neighbors had. We're talking here about John and Pam Swanson had a recommendation what they think is appropriate for safety and so as to not alter their sight lines and things like that. So I think really the purpose was to have the discussion. It's a situation where we didn't want to pigeonhole ourselves. I mean, it's kind of legal strategy, I guess, but we didn't want to pigeonhole ourselves and say, this is the dock that we're requesting. And if the Planning Commission absolutely hated it and the neighboring community said this is ridiculous, and the city council says everybody else hates this, how can we love this? Then we're looking at a straight denial. And so I think the purpose to do it the way that we did it was to allow for community input, for leadership input. And so, I think it was a decision between the applicant and the HOA and myself to strongly consider John and Pam Swanson's recommendation, because I think Mr. Roberts would agree with me in that he cares, and he even mentioned it in his own comments, he cares about what the neighboring community thinks, he cares about what leadership thinks. And so we really just didn't want to say it's either this way or the highway. We're going to spend time, we're going to get this survey, we're going to tell you exactly what we're looking for. And that would just pigeonhole the applicant into one hard, fast thing. Now, if you're going to tell me today that the council would like to see some sort of dock design, we would come back with the dock design. We get that. If the council says, look, we would strongly consider this if you provided the council with a dock that you think is appropriate, that maybe after communications with the neighbors you think appropriate, and maybe even review again at the Planning Commission level is appropriate, then, and everybody's going to strongly consider it, then of course the applicant would come back and say, okay, we hear what you're saying, we appreciate you listening to us, and we're going to come back with something, maybe even multiple options, and we can all sit here again and talk about it. They're open to that. I think, again, you can talk to your council about what's appropriate in terms of procedure, whether it's granting the variance with conditions that the dock is separately approved by leadership, or whether it's you're going to kick this back down to the Planning Commission level to be heard within the next 60 days with the dock, whatever it is. I think the applicant here is really focused on making sure that the community and leadership is on board with this. We're open to a discussion. If a council member has a particular recommendation, you know, we like I said, we liked John and Pam Swanson's recommendation. We thought it was actually fairly good. You know, it was something that we weren't prepared to because Mr. Roberts has to get approval from the HOA as a whole. He can't just come up here and say, this is me, I'm going to make the decision for everybody. So I think we just at that stage weren't in a position to say, yeah, we'll represent that. That's something that we would consider. So I think long-winded, I apologize for the answer. But I think it's something that is, it's important to discuss. I mean, that's ultimately what this is about. What's this dock going to look like? Frankly, how many slips is it going to have? And how can we accomplish what we want to accomplish that's safe for everybody and everybody, you know, ideally this is a win-win-win-win-win. You know, and I think the best way to do that was just simply to not pigeonhole ourselves into saying, you need to approve this dock. And, you know, we know maybe a neighbor doesn't like it, but this is what we're recommending. So I think it's just more for a discussion point.
Thank you for clarifying.
I don't know, Blake, if you had anything to add.
No.
Council, other questions of the applicant that you might have? I see a couple heads shaking no. I do have one more. One of the points of conversation that was brought up a number of times in Planning Commission, and oh, I just lost the reason, I had before me the rationale for denial, was the lack of practical difficulty. And I'm still, if someone were to say, what was the practical difficulty that was articulated? I'm not sure I have a good answer for that. And I'm not sure in the appeal or what I've heard tonight, I'm still not sure I'm able to articulate that. And I just want to give you an opportunity to speak to that of what other words you would like us to consider as it relates to that question.
Sure. And I believe I touched on this in my opening remarks. I just had a notification on my computer that said my internet is unstable, so I apologize if I'm breaking
You're
up.
coming
or if you
through loud
lose
and
me.
clear.
All right. Well, it feels like I am. If you look at your attorney's kind of memorandum, the practical difficulties test isn't just what are the practical difficulties. There's the three-pronged test. I talked about the proposed use is reasonable, and the reasons I gave why the proposed use is reasonable is because of you know, Tim's Marina. Blake mentioned Aqua. All the we understand that some of the lots are grandfathered in non-conforming, but are we going to sit here and say that those lots that are grandfathered in non-conforming aren't reasonable? I think people would say that they are reasonable. It just happened at a different time before the ordinance was enacted. So I believe I very strongly articulated why I think that the proposed use is reasonable. I'm going to skip number 2 because I think that's the one where I think everybody kind of has questions on. The last one is that the variance will not alter the essential character of the locality. And so the reason that the Planning Commission decided that that prong wasn't met was because of the doc that Mr. Hart included in the agenda packet that was largely the discussion of the Planning Commission. That doc was provided by the developer, I think over a year ago when this was early stages and Mr. Hart was on board and staff was on board. And I know some of the council was even on board in discussions. And so I think because Mr. Hart saw that the applicant didn't include a doc, he felt that it was important to have some sort of representation of what a doc might look like. And I'm not going to sit here and argue and say that that was a bad idea or a good idea, but that's just what he chose to do. And I think, you know, the John and Pam Swanson said that it was going to affect their sightline, that particular doc. And so I think with the recommendation that we approve some sort of doc that is different from that doc, even John and Pam Swanson's particular recommendation, you know, what Blake mentioned with Aqua and the surrounding lots, I don't think this is going to alter the essential character of the locality because there are many similar style docks on the lake that are for these communities. So again, we're talking about 5 slips. Somebody looking from, you know, 1,000 feet away isn't hardly even going to notice 5 slips to the end of a dock. It's a situation where, again, these neighbors are going to have concerns. Maybe it's sightline, maybe it's traffic, and we're going to listen to them. But I think, with the, the marinas and the aquas and even the docks on the north side of the lake that extend out pretty far, I don't think this alters the essential character of the locality. It's a lake. It's got docks. It's got boats. It's got slips. So I don't think it's a situation where it alters the essential character of the locality. And then going back to the second prong, first I'll start with the portion where it says it's not created by the landowner. So again, that was on my discussion where this was decided between the developer and leadership in the city at the time. These property owners that are affected by the current variance didn't create this issue. This is an issue that they inherited. I'm not going to sit here and argue with anybody about, well, they weren't on notice or the development agreement says this. They shouldn't expect it. I agree. The document says what the document says. So I think, again, we talked about what's an expectation, what's a prohibition, what's a restriction. So I do think it's an issue that's not created by the landowner, but it's a situation where, we talk from the lot change from 56 to 23 and how that's changed. It's a situation where we have the addition of these slips to whether it's decrease the traffic with the boats around the area, whether it's combining this with one thing Blake and I didn't mention is some of the people that already have slips can't even use their slips because the water level is so low. We can accomplish different problems. We can, if we're going to extend the dock or move the dock, like John and Pam Swanson said, we can create a safer area. And so I think, again, this is a unique variance. This isn't your typical variance. And so we're not going to have the same answer as we would for a pole shed or maybe it's a conditional use permit for storage on a property or something like that. I mean, we're looking at this slightly different than your average variance. And so we do think it's a unique circumstance that wasn't created by the landowner. And while it's going to be a different thought process behind how we get there, we do think that it meets the three-pronged practical difficulties test. And so that's, we had this same discussion at the Planning Commission. So I would encourage the council members, if they haven't already checked out that discussion, that would be worth having. I don't know if Blake had anything to add either. Or we might have lost him, I don't know.
Nope. Like, council members, other questions for the applicant or Councilmember Husnick?
Madam Mayor, I don't really have a question. I first of all, I told Blake this too a while back that to me, I could care less how many docks are out there. I mean, I don't, as long as it's done safely and that kind of thing. The problem is there's an ordinance out there, and I do have to defend the Planning Commission, which I served on for many years earlier. And the whole idea is to uphold the ordinances. And so if there's an issue with the ordinance, let's change the ordinance. And so just to be fair to everybody, I mean, it's a tough decision to go past what the Planning Commission has already decided. So just want to get my 2 cents worth out there.
Yeah, Sam, I'll piggyback on your comments. This is an ordinance that, and we don't have an ordinance change before us tonight, just to be clear, but this is an ordinance that I too am not in love with this current density restriction. I appreciate that there's goals around water quality, and one of the goals of those types of ordinances is to preserve the lake. But I also here we are in 2020 with boat sales through the roof and our public access points through the roof. And one of the #1 causes of invasive species are boats being trailered and moved from lake to lake. And if we had land use policies that allowed for boats to be stored permanently on a dock at a lake, maybe we end up with some better water quality. And so I'm also open to reconsidering some of those density requirements that are in our zoning. What's challenging on this particular question that's come before, and Blake, mentioned this in some of his opening comments, is there has been, maybe a path on considering a zoning text amendment But I also, from my understanding and discussions with staff, know that there is a lot of uncertainty around DNR willingness to bless that type of change, and or the consequences that we as a city might have on, you know, going down that path and what it might mean in other DNR approvals we might be looking for in other land use questions. And so we're just in this very technically complicated place where there doesn't seem to be a bright something that is within Forest Lake's jurisdictional control to kind of control all of the inputs here, because again, there's a lot of questions around what the DNR will and will not allow, and what that means for us, and other land use questions related to the DNR. And so it's a complicated area that I feel has kind of blocked what might be a preferred path for myself, and maybe a preferred path for the applicant. That leaves the only question to get these 4 additional slips is this variance amendment, and it's messy. It's not the path I would like to see us be able to provide, but I can appreciate trying to use all the tools in the toolbox, and this being the one. So but I also appreciate, Sam, your comments around the Planning Commission's role, and their role is to uphold our ordinances as stated, and I appreciate that as well. So Councilmember Gerard.
Yes, I also spoke for Blake, so I don't think anything I say will surprise him, but I was on the Planning Commission when this original development was put on in 2007. And this was a major issue, was the number of slips, because not everyone was going to get a slip. It was very clear early on, not everyone was going to get a slip. And the city and the Planning Commission both were adamant to get this cleaned up, get it in the covenants, get it everywhere. So everyone was clear, you either got a slip or you didn't get a slip, for the very reason that we didn't want to have to revisit, have a future council, which ironically I was appointed to, is having to revisit. So I think that back then the right decision was made, and I think the Planning Commission in their meetings looked at it thoroughly, and it really comes down to the land use and following the land use. The number of docks to me is irrelevant, because if we either are going to grant the variance to change usage or we're not going to grant the usage. The dock and the length and all that, that's just noise in the discussion as far as I'm concerned. It really comes down to, do we change it to allow 5 more slips so all the homeowners get them or not? And I think both the original development and what the Planning Commission did in the last few weeks was the correct decision.
That's good perspective. Thank you for that. Other questions, Councilmember Byström?
You know, as I reviewed the memo from our attorney as well, and listened to Mr. Roberts' attorney talk about the 3-pronged test around the practical difficulties, and kind of work through that pretty well. It still comes back to for the variance request to be approved, it must keep in harmony with the general purposes and intent of the ordinance. And that's where I'm getting stuck. I'm really wanting to see a pathway here to a resolution for this homeowners association. But the ordinance is the ordinance, is the ordinance. And that's the hard time I'm getting past. Now, is there a pathway? Is there a pathway? I'm not sure. I think Mayor Bain, you brought up, you know, a couple of suggestions, a couple of potential pathways. You know, 5 slips. This seems reasonable, you know, in the context of trying to meet the needs of this development. But, you know, this is the rule. And I believe that, you know, the planning commission in evaluating what needs to be in place in order for this to be approved, I also agree that the planning commission at this point in time made the correct decision. Now, does that mean something can happen at another point in time? I'm not sure. I mean, I'm also having a tough time, you know, and we've kind of talked a little bit about a pathway there, kind of resolving some of the concerns about the neighbors. Some of them cited concerns about, you know, property values, this impacting their property values. And I know Mr. Roberts mentioned in his letter to council, you know, this could potentially positively impact their property values. Well, we can't necessarily allow, you know, it to impose on somebody else's potential property value as well. I mean, I respect that you're trying to make an improvement that will improve your property values, but we can't allow it to negatively impact somebody else's either. I am concerned that we have 5 neighbors still that have issues of concern that, in my opinion, aren't resolved. This is a tough one because again, 5 boats doesn't seem like a big deal, but when you start trying to put all those puzzle pieces together, they're just not coming together cleanly for me. And I'm not sure what the answer to that is. And I guess I have to leave it at that at this point in time. So it's really the concerns of the property owners, the surrounding property owners. You know, it's clear what is needed in order for this variance to be approved. You know, there are safety concerns. I don't see, I agree, I don't see a dock plan. You know, there are just too many pieces of this that are unanswered for me at this point in time. Does that mean that I don't want to try to see a pathway to some positive resolution here? No, I just am not sure that I'm in a position to be able to say we have one at this point in time.
Mayor Bain, can I make a comment? Sure. I'm not going to go on and on about this, but I too feel like 4.5, 5 boat slips isn't the issue. That's not it. That's a non-issue for me. And listening to all of this, like, is there a pathway? Can we find a pathway? Because I also wonder if those neighbors that still haven't come to consensus on this, if they were shown a different plan, if there was time to talk about that, if there was a way to do that, would they then be able to work this out? Maybe that should have been done, you know, way back when, but I'm struggling with this, and I respect our planning commission. Usually they are very smart people on there and respect what they say and do, but I just feel like there's got to be a pathway to this one. And I know, Pete, we have procedure, and I guess that's my question is there a procedural way to look at this again?
And I would build on that a little bit. So if we were to deny this variance at this point in time, does that preclude the applicant from coming before us again if there was a pathway and a plan that was palatable to all parties concerned?
If I could add on to those comments and maybe just make a statement of position that I am uncomfortable with, just to give some maybe context around what's a palatable path and what's not an unpalatable path. The applicant, actually Mr. Duran, I think mentioned the option of approving with approving contingent upon successful agreement of, or coming to mutual agreement on what the dock design looks like. So I think that was one of the options presented, is could we approve with that being a contingency? And I'm having a hard time wrapping myself around that because I think such a critical part of the question before us is whether or not it alters the essential character. And I need to see I'm feeling like I need to see the design to make that consideration. And I think in approving something contingent, it gives a position of acceptance that I'm not quite sure. I'm not sure there is a design out there that would be acceptable. But I also don't know that there isn't one, and that's kind of the pickle that I'm personally in at this moment. So with that, Pete, I think there's been a number of questions around questions and if there's a way for us to thread the needle for a path forward and some options before council tonight. Wondering if you have some thoughts.
Your Honor, members of council, I do have some thoughts and I have a few answers, and I'll try and limit myself to answering your questions. Procedurally, whether or not another application could be made with a different dock or a new dock design is a layered question, because that new application has to meet some of the same criteria that this one does. And they can't have two bites at the apple to solve the same problem. So if the reason that you were hypothetically to deny a variance is because you don't like this dock design, but otherwise everything's fine, no problem with them to come up in the future with a different dock design. Procedurally, this is all stuff that should have been presented to and worked out with the Planning Commission. Respectfully, it's perfectly ordinary for an applicant to submit an actual plan and simultaneously make known their willingness to negotiate conditions around how that might change to make sure everyone's satisfied. Mr. Hart submitted to the commission the only plan that existed. And so I think that's on the applicant. But in terms of the second bite at the apple, as it were, the problem is that second part of the practical difficulties test. Is there something unique about this property? Mr. Doran focused heavily on whether or not the current owners are responsible for its creation, but that's a secondary question. First question, is there something unique about this? And the answer to that's the same, regardless of whether the dock is designed with 300 feet or 100 feet. Is this unique? And respectfully, I'm hearing some pretty clear consternation about the policy embedded in this specific ordinance. And Mr. Roberts suggested or reminded the council of a potential path about changing the ordinance. A majority of this council or a majority of the Planning Commission could initiate that process. And what's important about that process is it looks at it the way it should be, with all of the stakeholders at the conversation, public hearings that are published. Everybody is part of the conversation for good and ill, and it's not unfairly narrowed to the plight of a particular property owner that might be relatively compelling to all of us. We need to look at it as on a citywide basis. And so unless there's a solution to the uniqueness problem, I don't know that a second application would be viable. And I need to keep my comments in the hypothetical because we can only respond to whatever a landowner chooses to present. I don't know what that might be, but I do know the test in the law doesn't change. And several of those elements that are of concern and have been discussed tonight would not be addressed by a change in the dock configuration.
So following on that, given that concern and challenge of having two bites at the same apple, is there an appropriate path for us to table this evening and ask the applicant to present a design to Planning Commission for their consideration and recommendation, and keep that part of this continued application? Or are we required to, or is a better path in your opinion for us to either approve or deny tonight and allow for a second application?
Your Honor, members of council, your code makes the Planning Commission the final decision maker, and the only posture the council is in tonight is on appeal. of what the planning commission has decided or not decided. Unlike a lot of things that come before the council on a recommendation from planning commission, where it's this body's problem to resolve, to solve, to find a way forward. In this case, it's the planning commission's. And so the pathways are affirm or deny or reverse. I don't believe the law, the code at least, anticipates a pathway for the council to reverse and remand. A reversal would be a grant of the variance. So it's grant or deny.
And to be clear, if we were to deny tonight, the applicant is able to present another application as long as that has additional facts outside of what had been presented as part of this initial application.
Your Honor, members of council, I'm not sure that that's a true statement. That really
Okay.
depends on what it is that they are attempting to do. That would be a different application than the one that they just presented. And I certainly wouldn't want to create a false hope for the applicant or for the council looking for a way to solve a problem that another application is available to them.
Yeah.
I do think the straightforward pathway in the law to solve the problem for everyone would be a change in the law if that's possible. And if that's not possible, then there has to be, it was on the applicant, it was their burden to prove to the planning commission that there's something unique about their situation so that the law shouldn't apply to them. They've had that opportunity. They've made their case and the planning commission's made its decision. I don't believe they get another chance to do that same thing.
Thank you for that, Councilmember Gerard.
As I stated earlier, the development, what has changed since 2007? We granted 18 slips at the time, and now they want 23. So what has really changed that would warrant a variance? That being, you guys can ponder that if you want, or you can just toss it out for what it was worth. We have approved the comprehensive plan. So now all the zoning and ordinance will be reviewed over the next year, 18 months. It's probably a prime time if there wants to be further discussion on it at that time, because it'll be a holistic look at all of the ordinance and how it affects the entire district. Or in this case, you not only have a zoning ordinance, but you have the shoreline overlay ordinance.
Council, further questions either of staff, of the applicant, additional questions, comments? You know, I'm just making sure my own thoughts have already, I think my thoughts have already been covered in previous questions. Councilmember Husnick.
If I was in Blake's shoes, I'd be asking for the same thing, okay? However, as Paul mentioned, this thing, both of he and I have served on the planning commission for years and years and years. It's really a tough deal to override the ordinance. I mean, that's, the ordinance is there, and I think we have an obligation to uphold it. I'm just sorry to tell you that. And I mulled over this thing ever since I found out I was going to be on the agenda, and try to figure out a path or a way that we can make all this work. But I don't think we can cut the legs off the planning commission for doing their job. So I'm sorry to tell you that. And it's,
Councilmember Gerard.
Madam Mayor, I would make a motion that the council uphold the planning commission decision to deny the variance.
There's a motion on the table. Is there a second?
I'll second it, Mara.
There's a motion and a second. Further discussion. Pete, please.
Your Honor, Councilmember Gerard, would you mind stating the reasons why you would, why you've made the motion you have? If it's in support of what the Planning Commission has done, you can incorporate that. If you have your own reasons that deviate from that, we'll need to make a record of that as well.
It would be for the planning commission's findings of facts, their resolution that they signed.
Thank you.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion on this item? So I'll just add a couple of thoughts here. I continue to look for ways for us to expand public use of the lake and have been kind of consistent in that, whether we've had conversations about dock expansion at downtown, or consideration of public use of our right-of-way space that gives public access to the lake. I supported the aqua conditional use permit that's been expanded a couple of times. And go back to my previous comment around, I think sometimes expanding these types of dock situations is the best way that we are able to preserve lake quality. But I also recognize that that is not what our current ordinance says. I'm challenged when I look at the three-part criteria. I'm challenged in, that the variance will not alter the essential character of the locality. And I can appreciate why the Planning Commission voted the way they did, because no plan was presented to tell them otherwise. And there's a number of data points where that could go poorly, and that could actually be the case. And so without a plan and without knowing otherwise, I can appreciate why they voted the way they did. And we're still in that situation tonight of I don't know the answer to that. And so I would hope that in our action tonight that we're, able to perhaps find another path forward, and open to a number of ways that is, that a number of ways to accomplish that. We talk about the underlying zoning code and what those limitations are. The point was made by the applicant tonight that we are a fairly developed lake, and that is a true statement. But I think that because we're a fairly developed lake, both Forest Lake and Clear Lake, I think that actually puts even more pressure on these types of ordinances, because you have more people trying to find more dock utilization. And while we may not have additional housing developments going in causing these types of challenges, I think we will continue to have pressure of more people trying to use that lake, which does lend itself more towards, we need to take a look at this ordinance and decide what the right number is. So it's a really challenging vote tonight, and I hope we're able to find a path forward, because I don't think we're done talking about this. Any further comments?
Yeah, I would just echo that I agree with that, Mayor Bain. I think we clearly have some issues on the lake right now that need to be addressed beyond this issue here tonight. I think both Mr. Roberts and his attorney, Mr. Doran, made made a good case about kind of shoreline length and number of boats and I just think that we have to reconcile some of those issues, and I'm not exactly sure how we do that or what the pathway to that is, but I agree with you wholeheartedly that we need to keep some of this top of mind as a result of this kind of vote moving forward. We do have some issues, including single household docks that have 6, 7, 8, 9 boats attached to them, or 5, 6 or 4 or whatever. I don't think this is an unreasonable request. But I understand the reason why we can't move forward right now. But I do think we, again, have to continue to have this conversation and try to figure out if there's a pathway and reconcile some of these other issues that we're also having.
Any other comments from council?
Yeah, Mara, I mean, I have to agree with Kathy on the fact that there's some issues going on out there with multiple boats at different docks. I'm just looking at this purely from the ordinance point of view and the point of view that the planning commission worked on so hard and spent a lot of time on it. It was not an easy decision for anybody.
All right. Not seeing any other comments coming forward. Karen, could we have a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Gerard,
Aye.
Councilmember Husnick,
Aye.
Councilmember Munson,
Aye.
Councilmember Byström,
Aye.
Mayor Bain.
Aye. Motion carries. We'll move on to our next agenda item this evening, which is the 2021 local street improvement. Authorize preparations of plans and specs. Ryan, welcome.
Welcome. Mayor, City Council, Ryan Goodman, City Engineer here. Just kicking off the agenda item. Tonight, we're here to request authorize preparation of plans and specifications for the 2021 local street improvement project. The city's budgeted $2,645,000. I got some breakout there, but this the base portion funding of the project is comes from the 3 utility funds, franchise fees, and a small portion of the tax levy that was implemented a year ago. We're don't have the full amount budgeted in this project, even though the plan is within the city's current budget to increase that. So there would be some little bit of fluff right there. And then the bond revenue that we've took out. So $1.5 million went to last year's project, $1.5 million to this year, and $1 million will go to the 2022. There's a anticipated schedule we've lined in the memo as well, with an attached map of the streets identifying the improvements for the 2021 project. With the addition of the 5th Avenue Southwest portion, we don't know, until we start getting into calculations of quantities and infrastructure assessments, how far we'll be able to go, especially over the 210th Falcon area that we've identified in the map. The other areas we still want to, retain within the project of the approved budgets. The current budget of this year's project, the 2020, is running pretty low. We were able to add some additional lineal foot on that project based on the bids received. And I've heard, the bidding market out for next year is going to be very favorable to the city again. And also with the new bituminous plant, bituminous roadways, that provides 3 plants within our service area, the Forest Lake area. So, upon what we do, get the bid results, we'll review the project and see if we can extend those limits just like we do normally. So with that, if there's not any questions, I would request the city council to authorize preparation of plans and specifications at this time. And we're probably about a month earlier than normal, but we got some survey work to do on this project. So we want to make sure that's done before any snowfall. So we would get the snowfall or the survey done and then wait closer to make sure our budget's approved and finalized before we hit stuff too hard. But still able to hit the bid opening in March to allow for construction as soon as spring load restrictions are removed.
Thank you, Ryan. Council, any questions of Ryan this evening? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve. Or entertain a motion, whichever council's desire. Councilmember Husnick.
Madam Mayor, I'd make a motion that we approve the process that Ryan just described to move ahead with the plans and specifications for the upcoming projects.
I'll second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion on this item?
No discussion, Mayor, but just one quick comment. Can we send this map to the watershed and just in good faith, telling them that this is what we're thinking about doing?
We've already sent the information for the 2020, 21, and 22 projects, but we certainly can send this again to whoever you like.
Mike Kinney would probably be great. Would be the processor of it, and they were very happy working with us. So anything we can do to keep them moving along in our direction would be great.
Just one quick comment. The proposed 2021 project, none of the street as identified in the map within your packet is within Comfort Lake, Forest Lake Watershed District. All the 2021 street improvements are within Rice Creek Watershed District this year. But we can send
Don't
it
bother
along.
sending it to Mike then.
Any further discussion? Karen, could we have a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Gerard,
Aye.
Councilmember Husnick,
Aye.
Councilmember Munson,
Aye.
Councilmember Byström,
Aye.
Mayor Bain.
Aye. Motion approved. Moving on in our agenda this evening, we do have one discussion only item. And that is the Forest Lake Area Schools and Forest Lake YMCA Everyone Belongs contracting agreement. I wanted to bring this before you and get your council's feedback and put it before you for consideration. This is currently a budget. This project and the funds incorporated in this agreement are currently budgeted in 2021. However, in looking at the contract and looking at the overall work plan, the work is substantially complete in 2020, and so this is better considered as a 2020 unbudgeted expense. However, wanted clarity that if we were to approve this budget or approve this as an unbudgeted in 2020, we would reduce that offsetting amount in 2021. So it's really just a timing question, but it's a different timing than what we had originally anticipated. So want to get your feedback before we're asking for approval. Just to tee up what the services arrangement is, it is a partnership. There would be two parts to the contract. One half would be ours from the city of Forest Lake. The other half would be Forest Lake Area Schools. We would have identical contracts with the YMCA to provide these services. And essentially what we are purchasing is their both methodology as well as their facilitation assistance in the Everyone Belongs program. Those sessions are scheduled throughout the fall. From a budget standpoint, this contract is $18,500 is the ask. From a budget standpoint, we had earmarked $30,000 in the 2021 budget for this overall program. I am unaware of any group that's ever gotten together and said we're done, we don't need any further funding. So I don't think that I don't think that the only request for 2020 and 2021 is this $18,500, but I do think that the remaining amount to be spent in 2021 is substantially less than the current $30,000 we had budgeted. So this certainly eats up most of what was planned. I do expect that when that group is concluded that there will be some additional ask, but probably room for the overall to come in under what was originally anticipated. The change is really just the timing of those expenses. And again, want your feedback before we bring it to you for approval. Any thoughts or feedback?
Mayor Bain, are we dedicating any budget to the human rights? I mean, how does the Human Rights Commission kind of intersect with this? And I know historically they've had some small budget. Just clarify for me how this is all kind of woven together, if you can.
So this is currently in their Human Rights Commission budget. What is a bit unusual this year is that they are not formally meeting as a group. That is a group that does need to be reconvened and members reappointed. And again, back to our thoughts on the work plan, I would expect that this community visioning session and the plan that is the outcome of this contract really is a substantial input into us as council to say, okay, given that plan and given that vision and given that work plan, what needs to change for the Forest Lake Human Rights Commission from as it sits today in ordinance? And I would expect that to be for future council consideration. So this is a key input point to those future decisions, in my opinion, and important for us to fund and support, because that is what the city is getting out of it, is the transformation of that commission from what it has been to what we want it to be in the future. And so it is budgeted as a Human Rights Commission expense, although I want to be transparent on the current status of that group.
So the 18.5 that you're requesting is in the Human Rights Commission budget for 2020.
2021, and there's 30,000 in the 2021 budget.
Okay.
There is like 3,000 or 4,000 in the 2020 budget.
Okay, that's the clarification that I was seeking. Thank you.
And just to be sure the impact there, if you pass this and take it out of the 2020 budget, we will reduce the 2021 budget by the 18,000 and change there, and then look at possibly and probably reducing the levy by that amount.
Okay.
But also want the transparency that it is unbudgeted. There is not current room in the Human Rights Commission budget for this for 2020. So it's a change in period.
So the other point for me then, I just want to be sure, because I know we've had commissions in the past that we've charged with certain things and they just don't have anything to work with. Mm-hmm. You know, in terms of a budget. So I just want to be sure that I'm clear, you know, that we are able to, whatever we do into 2021, if we reconvene that Human Rights Commission in some form, that there's some budget of some kind or another for them to kind of work with to do their work. Or I don't know if that'll be still part of this into 2021. Potentially, I would imagine, like you said, the work doesn't end, you know, when this agreement ends necessarily, but just to be sure that we're not diluting that down to, to a point that they don't have something to work with.
They would have, is it 12,500 remaining in budget, which is substantially more than what they've historically had. And I think until we know more of what that plan is and that group is reconvened and they've really looked at that, course of work, there's some seed money there to get started. And so we're not starting them off with zero.
Okay. So you're not looking beyond the 18.5 to spend anything more on this particular piece of this project, the Everyone Belongs, the piece that's happening this fall.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Now I'm 100% clear. Thank you.
Councilmember Gerard.
So this moves along fairly quickly. Would we expect a report out still this calendar year?
There will be at least draft report outs available by this calendar year. And that is from a Everyone Belongs community-wide perspective. What won't happen from the City of Forest Lake's perspective is that will be input points for us to consider in a working group on, okay, given these input points, what do we do next with our Human Rights Commission? I would expect so it's ready for that consideration, but calendar wise, we're probably not having many of those discussions until early 2021.
Thank you.
So there will be report outs, but those are report outs with the scope being the same geographic footprint of Forest Lake area schools. It will then be up to us to say, okay, given those, what do we use as inputs on how we want to transform our own Human Rights Commission activities. But definitely report available for consumption. Other questions? And again, looking for feedback. This is not on for a vote tonight. Just wanted your feedback before we asked you to make a decision. Again, it is a significant, not a change in dollars, it's a change in timing. Go ahead.
Do you see any reason why this cannot come before you for us for a vote this evening?
It's not on the agenda for consideration, unless you want to amend the agenda.
So two things. I also would want to, we just got this in draft format earlier this week. I would want to make sure that staff's had sufficient time, Pete's had sufficient time, just from a legal perspective, that the agreement is in correct, proper form. And so I would say that would be the other. It's a difference in time, so wanted to give you that opportunity and then make sure staff's had enough time with the agreement. So expected would be that we bring this back at our next council meeting for approval. All right, I'm not hearing anything further, so thank you for that feedback and thank you for the consideration. Let's move on to staff updates, and we'll start with Patrick. We'll transition to Dan.
Okay, just one thing is that we met today with Sharon from the Senior Center. Sharon is retiring on Wednesday. So we are scrambling to try to figure out how we're going to, they have no other alternative to run or operate the Senior Center. So we are going to step in and try to find a way to at least operate it on a temporary basis, and then come up with a plan to run it, probably get the city a little more involved in that on a permanent basis. We will be talking to the Parks, Trails, and Lakes Committee on Wednesday regarding the Senior Center and what the future involvement of the city is and where we're going to go with that, and then hopefully come back to the City Council in a joint workshop that we have planned with the Parks, Trails, and Rec Board. I think it's the 19th of October. So that's the one thing we're going to do there. We're also going to talk to them on Wednesday, just to give them an update on how the golf course is going, and then talk to them about a possible new field use policy for the use of our fields and the reserving of the fields and so forth. So that'll be Wednesday. That's what we've been working on last week and this week. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Patrick. Any questions for Patrick this evening? Dan, you are up. And I don't think we have Chief Peterson tonight. We'll go with Chief Newman after Dan.
Mayor, members of council, I just have one update on the status of the CARES Act Business Grant Program. As of this afternoon, we've received a total of 37 applications for the program, and we have grant requests at this point in excess of right around $500,000. So we're well in advance of the $300,000 that was allocated for it. I'm currently going through and doing the underwriting for that to make sure that they're actually submitting reimbursement requests and have the proper paperwork in order. But right now, have quite a few applications. They're still continuing to trickle in. That application period will close on Wednesday, the 30th of September. So 2 more days for applications, but applications have far exceeded my expectations for what we got. So great response thus far for the program. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have of me or of the program.
Any questions for Dan? Dan, thank you for becoming our house underwriter in short order. Much appreciated. Kathy, I think you had something.
Do you have a breakdown nonprofit for-profit, Dan? Any sense of that?
I do. I don't. I think I do have it in front of me.
Just best guess.
Right around 30 of them are for-profit, about 7 or 8 are nonprofit. So the bulk of them are for-profits.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Chief Newman, and we'll go to Donovan after Chief Newman. And Chief, if you're with us, you're on mute. There you go. Maybe not. We'll come back to Chief Newman, Donovan, and we'll go pick up Ryan. I think we might, did we lose? No, Donovan. Donovan, you with us? Maybe not. We'll circle back to
Yes,
Donovan.
I am here.
Oh, there you go. Found the mute button.
Yes. Sorry, I stepped away. Are we doing staff updates?
We are, yeah.
Okay. Really, we're still accepting applications. I think there's some exciting conversations I'm having. It's a surprising thing. I'm not exactly in the front lines of the housing market, but still receiving inquiries from developers on vacant parcels that are zoned for residential use and, you know, very proximate to public utilities. So that's exciting. And I'm happy taking questions from City Council.
Any questions for Donovan this evening? All right, thanks, Donovan. Ryan, and we'll pick up with Dave after Ryan.
Mayor, City Council, City Engineer Ryan Goodman. I'll just kind of add on to what Donovan said. There are some, you know, significant inquiries on property. We don't want to publicly talk about that stuff yet, but I would suspect some of that does execute within the next year. But some stuff that is going to be moving forward in construction here in the next, well, already has, you know, the mini storage apartments off of Everton Avenue. So there are, you know, well into grading there. And then South Shore Vet Clinic, the expansion and the purchase of the residential property to the south to allow for their expansion. And we had their pre-con last week, so they'll start construction on that site this week. So that'll be a nice, you know, some commercial site stuff that's moving forward there. In regards to the 2020 local street improvement project, you know, we got a lot of areas just with wear course left, and then the area south of Forest Hills Golf Course is the last really stuff we got dug up still, and still working on that, some ditching down there. Other than that, that project's gone really well. And then obviously the Goodview 97 projects have been all open to project. MnDOT has signed off on the field work of that. There's some minor punch list stuff, but nothing major. And then the county continues to pursue moving forward with the county state aid highway 33 or Everton Avenue improvements along Menards and southward there. So they're working with property owners very closely on stuff that they'll have to incorporate in the project or any unique turning movements and stuff like that to meet all the criteria for that project. MnDOT's been pretty quiet on our Highway 97 project. We'll probably re-engage them, just see where they're at and see what future meetings we might bring them back to engage you guys as well. So with that, I'll just open up with any questions you might have, but there's still a lot of activity going on, even though the weather this week isn't favorable, but it's better than 90 to me. So.
Any questions for Ryan this evening? Seeing none, Dave.
Yeah, just one quick update. Compost site switches to fall hours starting next Monday. Those hours are posted on the website and they will be on the board too as well at the site. So I know people get a lot of calls this time of the year when we're going back to 4 days a week. So October 5th, Monday, October 5th is when we start doing the Monday, Wednesday, Saturday, Sundays again.
Thank you, Dave. Any questions for Dave? Pete, and then we'll do Karen.
Thank you, Your Honor, council members. I do have an update for you on one of the cases against the city. Because this is a public meeting and not in closed session, I just will limit my comments to what is public information. In the lawsuit that Virginia Fisher filed against the city over ownership of the disputed right-of-way, which is lake access on the south side of Clear Lake, the court last week granted our motion, giving us a judgment dismissing the case, overruling essentially her challenges to who owns the land, and the court has affirmed that the city owns the land. And so that's a good outcome for the city in that litigation.
Thank you, Pete. Any questions for Pete this evening? All right, Karen, any updates this evening?
Thank you, Mayor and council members. I don't have any updates.
Right. I think I'll give Chief Newman one more opportunity here. Chief, are you there? I think not. Dan, are you able to confirm? I think I'm seeing I think I received a code red update that 911 service has been restored.
It has been restored.
Perfect.
And all the social media has been updated and the emergency alert on the webpage has been updated as well.
Very good. Thank you for that. Council updates. Let's start with Councilmember Husnick and then we'll do Councilmember Byström.
Madam Mayor, I have no other updates except that I did attend the EDA meeting today. Well, it's with the downtown committee folks, and we talked about the sewer study that was the capacity study that was taken care of, and Dan talked about the business CARES Act thing that we had going here too. So I'll let you elaborate on that. Otherwise, I have no other updates.
Thank you. And Councilmember Byström, we'll do Councilmember Munson after Councilmember Byström.
Just in the last couple weeks here, attended the city or the senior center meeting with members of the board's executive committee with Patrick and Jamie. And I think Patrick, the follow-up was to meet with Sharon, and I think Patrick provided a good update on that. I'm glad to hear that's moving forward. Attended the Everyone Belongs session on Saturday morning for 3.5 hours, and there were about 50 people in attendance, which is pretty incredible for 3.5 hours on a Saturday morning. And I think the discussion was very rich, and I just look forward to the direction this is headed. A couple of citizen communications. I actually had 2 inquiries on why we're not posting video on the council page where we find the agendas. I had a few, they were both kind of looking for videos, and I ultimately sent them to LATV, but is there a reason why we're not posting them there anymore? Or is there a plan to do that? And then a couple of residents of the community that wanted me to thank Ryan and the MnDOT crew for the awesome roundabout. They like roundabouts. This one in particular, they commented on the design, the unique, what they characterized as a unique design comparatively. And they just felt that it really functioned well. So I told them I would pass that along.
Very good. Dan, did you, the question about videos going to the page, being linked to the page, I'm assuming that's the new structure since we're in Zoom meetings. Is that, where's the best place to send for that video repository?
So for right now, there's 2 locations. They can either go to LATV because they get the video feed, or the city's YouTube channel, which I'll get that's posted on the city's website. The main reason right now they're not automatically uploading to the agenda page is that we're not using that agenda software when we do the videos because we're using it through Zoom. So for me to get them off of here, I have to go to YouTube, download them, run them through an encoder process, and then upload them. And that process per meeting video can take somewhere between 2 and 4 hours per meeting to do so. So it's gotten kind of backlogged right now, but it's a pretty lengthy process. So for while we're in this remote session, it's best to get them directly from YouTube or LATV at this time. The goal will be at some point in the future to get them all migrated back over there to complete it, but since it's a fairly lengthy process, we're just putting people to those other 2 pages right now.
Is there a way, Dan, to put a little disclaimer at the top of that web page or redirect people?
I'll look into it. That page is not very user friendly since it's back-ended through our IQM2. I can look to see if we can't get something on there, but we don't have a lot of control over what we put on there, but I'll see if I can figure out a workaround for that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Councilmember Munson.
No update tonight.
Very good. Councilmember Gerard.
Thank you. I attended the planning commission meeting, the result of which we talked about tonight. And I also was at the watershed, and they were extremely complimentary of the meeting we had with them a week ago. General thought is to just keep the conversation flowing, and any information we can give them. I think they feel they're a little bit out of the loop. So I'm not exactly sure how we want to do this moving forward, but they were very complimentary and look forward to working with us on projects.
Very good. Just a quick update from me tonight. I also attended the Everyone Belongs session this Saturday. I would extend there so that there was a kickoff meeting this Saturday, and then we move into working sessions with the Equity Innovation Center. There's 4 different working sessions that are planned on Tuesdays that start, I believe, Tuesday, October 13th, if I can just do a quick calendar check. Yes, that first session is Tuesday, October 13th. Those are all evening sessions scheduled on Tuesday. Would invite council to attend those. And if we are going to have more than 2 of us in attendance, let us know so we can get that properly noticed as having a quorum of council present. But I would welcome everyone to be there that wants to be there, and happy to notice it so we can do so appropriately. Also, as Sam mentioned, had the downtown working group meeting met tonight. And also, as he mentioned, there was the sewer results of the downtown sewer study were presented. Interesting in that result, in that we have a current capacity challenge. And there's some, and I would point you to the agenda packet that has the summary of that, within the agenda packet that we discussed this evening, just to kind of get an understanding of what the current challenge was. And to be clear, it was part of the discussion tonight was that's a challenge under existing capacity, even without some additional downtown development. So really the question comes back on how do we resolve that, sooner rather than later, and certainly wouldn't want that to hold up our ability to approve the types of projects that we want to see down there. So it's great that we have that study done. We now know the whole goal on doing some of these studies is to reduce the risk and investment in downtown, and certainly the study has done that. But now we now know, so now it kind of comes back to us on what are we going to do for that. So always helpful though to see that information. And also, as Dan mentioned, it's great to see the response we've had to the grant program, and just a reminder that there's a couple of days left before we formally close out that program. We have 2 open positions on city boards. We have still an open position on the Planning Commission, and we recently have a position open on the Airport Commission. So Councilmember Gerard and Councilmember Husnick, I'm interested in your feedback on applicants. And it would be nice to get those positions filled before we get in here too much further into the year. So I'll be circling back with each one of you, and also council members, if you have other nominees or people you would like to talk about those positions, happy to consider additional applicants as well. Any questions or anything further this evening? Not seeing anything, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Motion, there's a motion and a second, and Karen, could we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Gerard,
Aye.
Councilmember Husnick,
Aye.
Councilmember Munson,
Aye.
Councilmember Byström,
Aye.
and Mayor Bain.
Aye, and we're adjourned, everybody. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Have a good week.